Thanks for hanging on this long. Yeah, we're kind of back to follow on the story that Bob told last year in terms of where the project came from. So we're not going to kind of repeat ourselves there. We're definitely here to tell you how the last 12 months have been, which is really busy. So in terms of a very brief recap, the Findhorn Watershed Initiative is a multi-generational vision of coordinated action for nature recovery and connection at a watershed scale. So that takes us all the way from the source of the river in the Monolith down to Findhorn Bay, where the river enters the Moray Firth. And the project's led by the Findhorn, Nairn and Lossie Rivers Trust, and here's our recent photo shoot. Lovely gang, most of whom are here today. I say the last year has been mainly full of building a team. We've been really blessed to have Guy join us and a couple of others, and then kind of nurturing all of those different stakeholder relationships that the Trust has held over time with landowners and anglers and land managers, but also building out to reach a wider set of stakeholders within the catchment. It's seen the kind of Rivers Trust's role and identity evolve quite a lot in the last 12 to 18 months, so that's been a really exciting process to help lead. And we've also been navigating our own hurdles in terms of funding, but I'll get into that a little bit later. In terms of who's actually funding this phase of the work, we were lucky to receive a significant grant from the Scottish Government's Just Transition Fund as one of their pilot projects in the first year of this 10-year commitment that they have to funding work towards the just transition in the North East. We also had a development grant from the Nature Restoration Fund and some money from the train line, LNER, which is towards community engagement in the upper catchment. And so we've built the project really intentionally as a kind of a three-strand approach, taking a kind of really integrated approach to looking at these three different parts together, so nature recovery, nature connection, and nature positive economy. And I hope, you find some inspiration in the way that we're drawing these different threads together, because it feels like we're doing something a little bit different to some of the others. So I'm going to hand over to Guy to talk through nature recovery, because absolutely, whilst I can bring the vision and the money, Guy is the man to turn it into trees on the ground. So.
Cool. Thank you, Elle. Yes, so the bit that I care very deeply about is the nature recovery element. So principally about creating a mosaic of nature-rich habitats that work for the landscape and the river to ensure I said I wouldn't talk about salmon, but I guess there's an element there which is very important, and it's creating a habitat for salmon in the future. So we've been beginning in the upper catchment. We've been motivated by the key ecological principles that we've been hearing about a lot today. Peatland degradation is quite key in our upper catchment in the monolayer, we all know that. But we also have very degraded woodland, riparian woodland habitats, and so it's a case of restoring those, and river restoration as and where it's appropriate. This is 1 year on, and we've implemented our first riparian woodland scheme. I think they're currently planting, and that's a 40-hectare scheme, which is looking at regeneration and planting as well. That's about 5 kilometres of shading that will result there, and you can see it's clearly in need. So that's about 14 land holdings that we've engaged in the upper catchment. That's all the major landowners. And we've been out talking to the gillies, the guys on the ground, and right up to the landowners themselves. The pipeline now is developing to look about 9 woodland and river restoration schemes, which equate to roughly 1,200 hectares of woodland that's looking to be potentially developed in the next few years. And that's excluding the headwaters of the catchment, which could be a further 2,500 hectares, but through deer management rather than the traditional woodland creation. That's maybe 40 kilometres of waterways to be shaded. And there's also an element of ancient woodland protection, which is something we haven't really talked about much, but I think is key in that these are the genetics that allow the trees to be suitable for the environment that they're in. So if we can preserve that genetics, it's incredibly important. And that's just a slide, a very brief slide to look at our catchment as a whole, and the yellow is the areas that we're focusing on at the moment, and the green is just the woodland that's currently in existence. So something that I didn't really think we'd be getting too heavily involved in, but which is becoming a key part of our work is a catchment deer strategy from source to sea. This is linking all the landowners up and moving away from just the deer management groups and down right through into the lowlands as well. Because yes, if we have excessively high herbivore numbers, riparian woodlands aren't easily going to establish. And to complement that, we've been developing a seedling survey strategy. We trialled that in the upper catchment with a 2,500 hectare study to monitor the progress. That wasn't meant to be in there. But that is what the 2,500 hectare study looks like. We've also been doing some of the key work that a lot of the Rivers Trusts have been doing, and that's the temperature monitoring in our salmon spawning tributaries, with a lot of help from our water bailiffs who are here today. It's been absolutely brilliant, and that's coming back with vital data already. Some of them are getting up to 24 degrees in the worst time of the summer. So lastly, just lessons learned. It's not a one-size-fits-all. There's lots of different characters, lots of different land use types, so there's lots of different ways of achieving the things that we want to achieve. Who knew a Rivers Trust would do a deer strategy? But watch this space, because it could be something that catchments would like to get involved in the future. Timing's everything. Bird surveys, the weather, FGS, lining up funding, all coming together to make things happen in a year has been quite complicated. And what sounds like a cliche, but change happens at the speed of trust. You lose the trust of one landowner, and you might shut the door to thousands of hectares and kilometres of waterways. So it only happens at a slow speed, and that trust is key. Yes, and this is just what we're trying to aim for now. Implement the schemes, formalise the landowner relationships, potentially look at peatland restoration and those coastal habitats that we'll come to as we move down the catchment. Back to Elle.
Okay, and there's Guy in his element, explaining to people why we need to re-wiggle a burn. So I've got the next section, which is around, as we're framing it, nature connection, but essentially growing more nature-relatedness in the catchment. And the entire project really is rooted in this belief that whilst getting trees in the ground and restoring peatland is very important, lasting nature recovery is as much about our human relationships with the natural world as it is about the practical action on the ground. So we've had an interesting time of it, trying out a few different approaches on this front, and we've just wrapped up a 6-month pilot programme of community engagement from source to sea and worked with a few local partners in the catchment. So we've had a local arts company in the lower catchment delivering all sorts of different events and activities with people, helping them kind of surface and connect to their sense of relationship with the river. We've been working with an environmental education charity called Wild Things, who have been delivering activities for all ages. They've had lots of school groups out, but also they've been taking over 60s in minibuses up and down the catchment for walks, which has been really fun. And then we commissioned a really amazing piece of work that I'm going to get into a little bit more in a couple of slides. But we commissioned 2 researchers and residents in our upper catchment. And because the vast majority of the work over the last year has been focused on the uplands, we thought it was kind of pertinent timing to look at how the Gaelic place names in the landscapes could help inform the restoration choices that we were making. But then that kind of spiraled into looking also at the cultural heritage that those landscapes have had in the past, and rediscovering the names and the stories and songs that were once more prevalent in those landscapes and bringing them back to life. So our 2 researchers, Ranich Sunderland and Mary McFadden, have done an amazing piece of work on that. So here's some photos to help bring that to life. All sorts of different things going on. But I guess the highlight, I think, I would say, was an event that we had just a couple of weeks ago. This is the hall in Tomatin, if you know where that is. They've got a really lovely community hall that was put up just before COVID, so it's a kind of new, it's a really beautiful space. They haven't made much use of it yet, but we filled it to the rafters with an audience of about 150 and a long waiting list who couldn't make it in for an evening where they brought the songs and the stories of the landscape back to life. They kind of been digging around in the archives in Edinburgh and lots of old books, and then they had a bunch of really incredible musicians, including the award-winning Gaelic folk singer Julie Fowlis, come and sing them. And it was really special, and having a strong contingent of people from the catchment and from those communities in the upper catchment coming and hearing those songs coming back to life, and the kind of nature-related stories that are within those songs telling us what used to be there, and there was something really powerful about it. So in terms of lessons learned, it's not a small undertaking to try and wrangle this kind of multi-partnership approach to such a young project. So that's been quite hard work, but it has been rewarding. And this relationship to place that has come out of these community engagement activities has been a real, we get this sense that it's a proponent for change. We're going to have a pause now and look at the data that we've been gathering in terms of feedback, and look at how we might develop an in-house role at the Rivers Trust to do more of this work going forward. And so then on to our third strand, which is nature positive economy. So how can the Rivers Trust play its role in enabling a thriving nature-based economy? Just in really practical terms, we've had a couple of big grants, and we've been prioritising building community wealth by reinvesting a lot of that money back into working with specialists that are based in the catchment or nearby. So that's been really rewarding, both in terms of relationships, but also in terms of economic benefit. We had this incredibly tense, and there's a few of you in the audience who were my kind of agony aunt through this process. Alison definitely deserves a shout out. But we had this incredibly tense 6-month waiting period where we put a request into the Just Transition Fund in August saying there's no way that we're going to get these trees through FGS and get them in the ground within the year, and we need more time. And then we were forced to wait for 6 months for an answer about whether we get an extension. So thankfully, the tenacity, but I think also a visit to our MSP helped, and that has got signed off. So we've got another year to put this really generous funding to good use. I think another thing that maybe like the deer, we kind of inadvertently didn't know kind of when we set out on this journey was that we were setting off with this kind of vision of restoring our river catchment, quite romanticised, but we didn't realise we were stepping into this opening world of nature finance markets and natural capital. And so we've been trying to navigate that with our eyes open as much as possible. And I can definitely confirm from some of the interest that we've received from some of these very slick talking investment types that the catchment scale approach definitely has an attractive proposition to them. And we got quite far down the line exploring a partnership with one of them. Only due to kind of conversations with our board, we sort of stepped back and took a pause on that, and we're going to re-engage this year. But I think what we want to do, and I think the Just Transition funding has supported us with, is really embed those principles of kind of equitable, fair benefits coming back to communities and being reinvested in the ecological restoration work, not just going into the pockets of the wealthy investors that are putting the money in. So yeah, there's more work to do on that, and I think, watch this space. Maybe we'll come back next year and talk about the natural capital strategy. But with that pause, it kind of opened up more attention for this really exciting partnership that's been named a couple of times today, the River Within, which is with Chivas Brothers and with our neighbours on the Spey and the Devon. It's really exciting, a sort of multi-year, multi-million partnership. The three Rivers Trust working in coordination as a kind of a unified body with the corporate partner. And we managed to negotiate that, also having revenue to cover some staff time as well as the capital funding. So that's hopefully a model that inspires other corporates to do similar things. So in terms of lessons learned, I think natural capital strategy takeaway is don't just dive in because it sounds really good and it's trendy. Follow your instincts. And in terms of what next, we're going to be developing this natural capital strategy but with as high integrity as possible and linked to the just transition outcomes. And then building more capacity within our catchment. We want to make sure that the generation that is coming through can play its role and be equipped to help with the restoration work that's underway and see it through into the future. Thanks for listening.